Welcome to Biblioventures, Monsters and Ghosts. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we're going on a biblioventure through the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which we've done, and A Christmas Carol. And this is episode 3 on Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol. And joining me as co-host is Olivia Rutigliano. Hi, Olivia.
Hi, Ed. Thank you for having me, as always.
I am so happy to have you, especially because you give me an email right before we started tonight, like, I want to talk about Dickens as a magician. All right. So that'll
Yeah.
be awesome. We'll hit that tonight, definitely. Um, if you are watching live right now, thank you so much for watching. People from all over, looks like Seattle, Washington, Roanoke, Virginia, Philadelphia, Merchantville, Jersey, Delaware, New Mexico, Haddonfield, Jersey, Southwest Michigan, Dunlap, Tennessee, Richmond, Virginia, Huntington Beach, California, Surf City, USA, as he says it is, or they say it is. I'm not sure who it is. Beaufort, North Carolina, Denver, New York City, Washington, D.C. I'm sure some people will join us from around the world as well. You guys enjoy and Brooklyn. All right, Joe jumped in with Brooklyn right there, and Los Angeles. Someone else. If you're watching live right now, enjoy that live chat. That's for you guys to enjoy yourself during the show. If you are watching the recording, I ask you to, if you have questions or comments, you can put them in the comments via YouTube, and I will respond to them in due time. And for all of you, I encourage you to like these videos and to subscribe to the Rosenbach's YouTube channel. All these episodes are available to watch anytime on this channel, so it's very easy to catch up if you happen to miss one. Or if you're just discovering it out of the blue sometime in the future. I'm speaking to you now in the future, and you just discover it. Well, all the episodes are there for you to watch. So we bring this show to you free. There we go, Brazil. Val's coming in from Brazil. Hi, Val. We bring this show to you free of charge, but if you would please consider making a donation to the Rosenbach, it would be much appreciated. If you've already donated or joined as a member, thank you, because that's how we get to do these shows for free because of your support for the Rosenbach. And if you've not already made a donation, joined as a member, I invite you to do so. Olivia, I'm drinking punch tonight, and I'm drinking Dickens punch. Every episode, we feature a drink enjoyed by the Victorians, and this punch recipe is from Dickens himself. And we have it in his handwriting in a manuscript at the Rosenbach. Let's share away, shall we? Let me share the recipe with you. And here it is. This is written on the cover of the recipe, Olivia. And I would ask, have you ever had these? Most people haven't had this one from tonight, but there's a second one that people have had because it's in a different letter. And it says receipt, which is what people used to write for recipe, receipt in the 19th century, receipt for making cuppo punch. I love the O, cuppo punch. This isn't Dickens's handwriting now. Given to me by Mr. Dickens and then Bose here at Lucin, November 1846. And this was given to, and here's the first page. The first one is to make moonbeams for summer drinking, but drinking it tonight to fight off the cold. I've actually warmed it on the stove. And the other recipe is to make 3 pints of innocence or punch. Now, this second recipe, which is a little longer, it's like, it's 2 full pages, one half page, a full page, and a half page. And then at the end, and this is all Dickens's handwriting, Lucin, 13th November, 1846. And he gave it to his friends, Lavinia and Richard Watson, who he had met shortly before then, I think, and then re-met them in Lausanne, in Switzerland. And the moonbeams here it's zoomed in a little more, is not well known at all. I think the last time this was printed anywhere was in like the 19 teens or something like that in the Dickensian magazine. The other recipe for his innocence punch, he gave that same recipe to someone else once in a letter, And that is the one you go online and you first search Dickens punch and you'll find that recipe. Ours is it's written a little differently, but it's the same recipe for that punch. We're gonna have that next week, or I'm gonna drink that. You may also drink that, everyone watching the show, because I'll share the recipe this week. But this one isn't as well known, and I love that it's called Moonbeams.
That's
Um,
really dreamy.
yeah, and
Just a nice name.
it's Madeira and brandy and water. And his measurements are 2 wine glasses of Madeira, 2/3 of a wine glass of brandy, and then 4 wine glasses of so uh so it's double the water. I actually find the double the water too much, so I've kind of lessened the water for mine, and it's still a little too much. But and then you just put a little lemon peel, sugar in it, close it up in a pitcher and store it. It's great. It's good to sit for a little bit. And it kind of the flavors get together, especially with the little lemon peel in it. But you can also heat it on the stove, and I did that tonight, and it turned out very nice. Stop that share. I've got it in a little burner here to keep it warm, but it's this beautiful golden color from the Madeira and the brandy. Um, and sweeten to taste. I put as much sugar in as you want it. I mean, put a little sugar in and then add more as after you taste it. Man, its punch is good. There's just not enough punch drinking anymore, I don't think. This also to the Watsons, who he was friends with. Watson was actually Richard Watson was the youngest son of a lord. He was but he was also an MP, and he was a big reformer. And this is how Dickens, got to know him well and thought he had a lot in common with him. They lived at Rockingham Castle, which you can still visit. I think we'll have the link in the chat there. It is this gorgeous castle, and they do like Renaissance festivals there, and you tour the house, and you can have events there. And Dickens stayed there several times. And he got along so well with Lavinia and Richard that he dedicated David Copperfield to the Watsons. So they were important friends for him, and met them and said, they like this punch probably. He said, "Oh, I'll write it out for you." And so thank goodness we have it. You can find these recipes in the YouTube description right under this episode. But if you register for the show, I send the recipes and emails out every week. And you can register for Biblioventures, Monsters and Ghosts on the Rosenbach website. All right, Olivia, I'm drinking, I'm smoking. And we should, oh, you're muted still there.
Sorry, there was a little dog drama behind me. I've got my trusty water, so I'm all set to go. Let's do this.
Let's jump right in today. I say jump right in after I've taken like 10 minutes to talk about the punch I'm drinking. That's as fast as I jump in.
But now we're making a splash. So
yes, thank you. The Stave 2 from the last episode ends with Scrooge extinguishing the first spirit's light, or attempting to, by putting that extinguisher down. Somebody had written me an email saying, why did I call it an extinguisher? I thought it was a snuffer. There always winds up being confusion about that term. To snuff candles does not mean to put them out. To snuff candles, snuffers are little scissors that they would have, and snuffing means to clip the wick, which is getting too long and black and it starts to smoke. So when you snuff a candle, it doesn't mean putting it out, it means to trim the wick. And extinguishing it is what they would have, little extinguishers, and they were little conical devices that they would put down. And this spirit has a giant one for a head. So it looks like a dunce cap, but it's big enough that can fit the whole spirit in, as Scrooge does at the end. But as we talked about, as Max and I talked about in the last episode, Olivia, he can't quite extinguish all the light. It's still coming out at the bottom. All righty. Well, now we're at Stave 3. the second of the three spirits. And Olivia Max pointed out that, that makes Marley spirit 0.
Yes, it does.
So, yes. So now
Marley's a ghost. He's not a spirit. There's a distinction in this book.
and they're also called ghosts. And
Yeah,
even
but Marley's
yes.
the ghost of a person who was living.
Yes, he
and
is.
These are, abstract entities from the beyond.
Yes. Thank you. This time, despite the time that Scrooge spent with the spirit, well, at first when he goes to meet the spirit, he knows he went to bed late, and then suddenly it's 1 o'clock and the spirit's there, and he's like, "What?" So, and now he knows he's been with the spirit for some time, and now he's back to the bell once again tolls 1. So very timey-wimey we have happening with the spirits here. They bend time, they move time around. In the beginning, when Marley said they're going to visit you on 3 successive nights, well, but they kind of don't. They do and they don't. So it's all in one night in the end, but that not until the end because the time has to go back again. He wants to immediately confront the spirit this time. He doesn't want to be surprised by the new spirit, so he opens all his bed curtains up. And you ever sleep in bed curtains?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
I've always wanted to.
I slept in some 16th century villas in Italy that still had the bed curtain, the castle. Yeah. It was really fun.
I get cold. Our bedroom's cold at night, and I would prefer to have that, but my wife would hate it. So we can't have bed curtains.
No one on this broadcast get bed curtains for Ed for Christmas.
No, they won't get used. So,
are you ready?
What's that?
Nothing. I'm so excited because this is my favorite of the three spirits.
It is. It is a joyous, joyous time as we're going to meet him now. And light happens again. Now there's some light, but Scrooge can't figure out the source of the light. And he doesn't want to be surprised. There's nothing between a baby and a rhinoceros could have astonished him very much. He's ready for anything. And this blaze of ruddy light happens. He worries that maybe it is an interesting case of spontaneous combustion.
Dickens loves spontaneous combustion.
He does. He uses it in it's used in a novel of his. It's an actual plot point. I won't say the novel because I don't want you to if you don't know it, it's better to read it than you encounter it.
But readers were so mad that he had to write an article defending his use of spontaneous combustion as a way to kill someone.
Not only that, but George Henry Lewis criticized him in the press for it. And Dickens, because of the nature of the serial and because he's still writing the serial every month as it's coming up, I don't know if it's the next issue or if it's 2 issues later, as a narrator, he responds in the serial, in the story itself. Some people say that spontaneous combustion can't happen. Ha ha, yes it can. And that's why it's in here. And so it's really funny
really good.
But Christmas Carol is not serialized. I want to reiterate that for everyone who may have thought that it was not a serial. It was published in one book all at the same time. So, so he can't respond to people in real time as he did in his serials. He notices the ghostly light is coming from the adjoining room, and then a strange voice calls him by name and bade him enter, and he obeyed. And what he sees is, do you have it? It was his own room. Just read that paragraph. It's just a lovely paragraph of the description of him, and I'll share the image while you're reading that.
You're gonna have to read it because my dog is going crazy. There's a sound in the hallway. It's freaking
okay. Then I will read it. Let me put the image of it up. And I have the wrong image queued up.
I'm sorry, Ed. I'm going off and on mute while she barks.
But it is one of the great entrances of a spirit. Here he is. And it was his own room, Scrooge's room. There was no doubt about that, but it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove, from every part of which bright gleaming berries glistened. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney as that dull petrification of a hearth had never known in Scrooge's time, or Marley's, or for many and many a winter season gone. Heaped up on the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat, sucking pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense 12th cakes, and seething bowls of punch that made the chamber dim with their delicious steam. In easy state, upon this couch, there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch in shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and held it up, high up, to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door. "Come in!" exclaimed the ghost. "Come in and know me better, man." Um,
What
it
a great
is
guy.
it is, and the great Dickens lists. He can't help a list, and
Loves a list.
I love his lists. I get hungrier every food item he mentions. And it is it's a gorgeous picture that Leech drew of it. He's got the green robe. He'll describe this a little bit later. He's got the holly wreath on his head. And he's bare chested, of course. At first, when Leech illustrated it, he did a watercolor and showed it to Dickens. And that watercolor is at the Morgan Library in New York. And here it is. And it's the same thing, except he gave him a red coat. Dickens corrected him quickly and says, "Hey, it was actually green." And Leech had actually done these as well to help the colorists when they colored the pictures for the editions. So he had to they had to know that this was supposed to be green, and it was when they did it. They painted it, green as well. I like this first page because look, he's got a little study of Scrooge up here in the corner that he's just drawn before he's done the face down at the bottom. And this is at the Morgan, this watercolor. Look, this pig's just like lying. It's like this pig is just like sleeping. Does he look the same in this one? Oh,
No.
yeah. No,
Well,
it's a bunny.
It's a rabbit.
It's a
Yeah.
rabbit here. Is that? Well, maybe it's a rabbit here, but it looks more like a pig to me. I don't know. I can't tell. Um,
One of my favorite things about the legacy of the Christmas Carol is that they don't know, some adaptations don't know what to do with the first ghost who's supposed to look like a candle. And think about the George C. Scott version in which, Angela Pleasance just sort of plays this luminous woman ghost and sort of
yeah.
the equivalent. But the Ghost of Christmas Present looks exactly the same in every single adaptation. And it's amazing. They all match this illustration so beautifully. I love it.
I guess the last one too, the Spirit to Come, Christmas to Come.
Yeah, I mean,
because what it is.
it's just a Grim Reaper sort of,
the next episode, yeah.
But this is a hyper-specific ghost. Like the Grim Reaper sort of is an indelible image that exists prior to and after and outside the context of A Christmas Carol. This guy's only in here, and he's my favorite ghost.
I wanted to mention Leech this time again, because I haven't really talked about him much. And where's his little cartoon? Here he is. John Leech here's a cartoon he did of himself. I like this. This is fun. Was a well-known illustrator at Punch, very experienced cartoonist when Dickens had asked him by the time Christmas Carol came out. But actually 7 years earlier, Leech was when Robert Seymour, who was doing Pickwick Papers and started the Pickwick Papers, and had Dickens write it with him when Seymour died. And they were auditioning new illustrators, Leech tried to get the job um, in 1836. He didn't get hired. Fizz did instead, Habit Knight Brown, and but Leech kept approaching Dickens in his as his career was moving along. At least 5 times he offered to illustrate for him, including the serial Martin Chuzzlewit, which was being serialized at this time when Christmas Carol was released. Earlier in the year when it had started, Leech had asked if he wanted him to do it, but Dickens wanted to stick with Fizz. But in those years, they had become friends, Leech and Dickens. He dined often at Dickens's house. So when Dickens needed somebody for Christmas Carol, because Fizz was already doing Chuzzlewit, he didn't want him to have to take the time off to take the time to do Christmas Carol as well. He asked Leech. Leech created color sketches for the colorists to use as guides, as I showed with the Ghost of Christmas Present. And when he saw the paint them painting them, he actually didn't like them. He thought that they were too bright, too vivid, the final product. And Dickens told him, "No, wait, you'll see them when they're published. They'll look in the book. They're going to look fantastic," and they did. And that coloring process works so well that many of those first editions and collections still look gorgeous. That they've really held up over time. For the black and white illustrations that Leech had to do for these, he had to draw them directly on the block of wood. And then William James Linton, who was engraving them, would actually carve over his illustration and write on the block. So that's how they did those. Well, Leech continued to illustrate for Dickens's Christmas books. All 5 of the separate Christmas books that Dickens wrote contain Leech illustrations, although the rest of them have multiple illustrators. But Leech is the one constant in all of them, and he's the only illustrator of A Christmas Carol. All righty, that was my little dive into John Leech. The 3 things that I want to note about the spirit here is the bare chest and bare feet. That's, he makes a point of it, and you see it in the drawing too. I don't know, Olivia, if it makes him more pagan or it makes him actually more Jesus-like, because you frequently see Jesus, especially on the cross, and you see, so much of him. Or it's a combination of both.
Yeah, I think I don't know. There's something very like solsticey about him,
Yeah,
regardless of denomination. Like that he is just sort of embodying all of these different like visages, all these different like countenances and appearances of
he's the
sort
Yule
of
god.
wintertime spirit of like bounty, plenty, and like love and giving. And
Yeah. I mean, he's got the holly wreath on his head,
yeah,
even the
yeah, yeah. I
icicles
mean,
on it.
he's very Christ-like with the hair and
Yeah.
but at the same time, there is something very, very like druidic about him.
Yes. And he has a rusty scabbard,
Yes.
but no sword. So, a symbol of peace, a symbol of, someone who never has to, go to war to fight for things because he's got a magic horn that he sprinkles people with. Um, I love the come in and know me better. I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me. I mean, he's just, check me out. And Scrooge, you have never seen the like of me before. Scrooge says never, and he says, have never walked forth with the younger members of my family. So Scrooge asks how many brothers he has, and he says 1,800. Um, which gives Scrooge an opportunity to crack a joke, which he does all the time. A tremendous
Yes.
family to provide for. Um, but the 1,800 brothers means that there's one every year, right? That ghost of Christmas past that we had was like a personal ghost, it seemed like it has memories only for Scrooge. even though there's memories of other people at the end, his ex-fiance, and he sees her later married. But they're talking about him at least. But that's almost a personal spirit. And this, though, he's Father Christmas
Right.
is who he is. I mean, and there's a new one every year. Um, and we will see him age as we go through this. Um, Scrooge has already changed or feels that he's changed. And we saw that as soon as he's off with the Ghost of Christmas Past, he's crying, he's upset. He's very upset at the end and forces the spirit to end these visions
Mhm.
that he's being given. But he says, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learned a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it. So it's this is a he's already a new Scrooge uh,
Yes.
coming through here. Well, their first stop is they just go outside and they're in the city streets in London on Christmas morning, um, and there's snow because there's always snow at Christmas for Dickens. Do you know this that the Dickens grew up as a child in the coldest decade in England since the
Yep.
1690s. Um, so nearly every year of his childhood, there was snow
Yep. Yep.
on
He
Christmas.
loved snow. It's this
So
indelible, important facet of winter. He was very frustrated when there was a winter with no snow in his adult
yeah,
years.
yeah. So and as I'm always frustrated by,
Yeah.
so
Bing
uh,
Crosby says White Christmas. Come on.
it's such a
Come
rare
on.
thing. Well, I mean, I could live further north and then I would get it, but
Then you'd
living
have to live further north.
new, and it's becoming rarer. Um, but for Dickens, it's always, I mean, in his memory, because his memories of Christmas are always tied in with snow. Um, but it's might be icy cold out, but it's cheerful. This is there was nothing very cheerful in the climate or the town, and yet there was an air of cheerfulness abroad that the clearest summer air and brightest summer sun might have endeavored to diffuse in vain. Um, and then we get another one of these descriptions, which I won't read, but it is about all the shops and all the food, the Poulter shops and the fruiterers, the chestnuts, shaped like the waistcoats of jolly old gentlemen, baskets of chestnuts. Um, there were onions, Spanish onions, winking from their shelves and wanton slyness at the girls. So again, he's doing this personification that he loves to do in these stories, and it's just. And again, I get hungry as he's listing all these things here, and it's the idea of that plenty, right? It's just they're just bursting with delicious, yummy things for everyone. Um, and the this passage, I mean, the book's reviewed everywhere. There were a couple newspapers that didn't review it. Instead, they like took these shop passages and they literally excerpted them and put them in their newspaper, like on the front page kind of the newspaper. So it was almost like an advertisement to go out and buy things at Christmas, as well as we're seeing Christmas becoming more of you know um, a mercantile holiday. Um, Also, we see the people have to carrying their dinners. There's more. Wait, there's more food here. More food. Figs. Yeah. The people are going to church in their best clothes, or they're taking their dinners to the baker shops, and that's generally the people, the poorer people who can't bake at home because they didn't have ovens then, and they especially didn't have an oven big enough to really bake, large things in. Um, so it was common practice to have, the bakers, and they would cook dinners for people. and deliver them, or you would go pick it up. And we'll see, this is what happens with the Cratchits later, as well. And as they're going along, how's your dogs? Good? They're still
Oh no, we're fine. Yeah, yeah. No, I'm
okay.
fine.
Um, the spirit does things. What is he doing with their food and stuff as he's going along here? Why don't you jump in here?
Which paragraph?
Um, as they're he sees them as but soon the steeple's called Good People All. It's like in the middle of that.
Yeah, but soon the steeples called good people all to church and chapel, and away they came, flocking through the streets in their best clothes and with their gayest faces. And at the same time there emerged from scores of by streets, lanes, and nameless turnings innumerable people, carrying their dinners to the bakers' shops. The sight of these poor revelers appeared to interest the spirit very much, for he stood with Scrooge beside him in a baker's doorway, and taking off the covers as their bearers passed, sprinkled incense on their dinners from his torch. And it was a very uncommon kind of torch, for once or twice, when there were angry words between some dinner carriers who had jostled each other, he shed a few drops of water on them from it, and their good humor was restored directly. For they said it was a shame to quarrel upon Christmas Day, and so it was. God love it, so it was.
He ends in these interjections. I mean, it's the narrator, and uh, some of the things that people don't like about him, this kind of, effusive joy that he comes up with, I, it works for me.
Yeah. I mean, I think the scene is so interesting too because it shows the sort of like unbelievable power of this spirit, but it's in a almost like in a simulation of Christmas Day. This is an actual Christmas Day. Scrooge is in, a dream alternate universe to preview the Christmas Day that's ahead of him. But the ghost is, the spirit is sort of flexing that he has this ability to sort of change people's dispositions.
Haven't
Which
they moved ahead in time? I mean, maybe they've just moved ahead in
I mean,
time
it's but the
because they
time,
have the
but time
power
is
to.
time is so flexible and abstract. I mean, like not to Matthew McConaughey, but like
Yeah.
time is a flat circle, right? With these ghosts, and it's not. But this is a non-existent reality, and the ghost is showing that he has this power to sort of change people's opinions or change people's dispositions and attitudes, and yet Scrooge is being put through this whole ordeal specifically to change his dispositions and attitudes. And yet the ghost is showing that for others, it would be so simple as to sprinkle a
Yeah.
little water on them, which suggests either that, Scrooge is a more serious case than someone who's just temporarily cranky on the road, that it's more of his holistic approach to life that is the problem, than, instead of some moody griping. Or it's just this funny, like, oversight, and Dickens doesn't realize that this is sort of like a little plot hole.
He says he says to Scrooge earlier, have never walked forth with the younger members of my family, meaning that putting the kind of that Scrooge had to choose to walk with them to get this, in a sense. Like even these guys
Yeah.
who are arguing here that he drops the water on,
Right.
they are apparent, something about them is apparently willing for this, but Scrooge
Mm-hmm.
has never been willing.
Mm-hmm.
And it is incense in the food or these kind of water drops, he says it looks like. And is there a peculiar flavor in what you sprinkle from your torch? There is, my own. It's his own flavor he's giving everybody.
He's a
And
happy
and
guy.
and it is to any kindly given, and then to a poor one most. Why to a poor one most? Asks Scrooge. Because he needs it, because it needs it most. Um, that it's the poor that the spirit wants to help the most. And then Scrooge gets his words thrown back at him here. By the spirit about the you would deny them. Oh, but whoa, first Scrooge confuses the spirit here, and he talks about, he says you would, he says he accused the spirit they would deprive them of their means of dining every seventh day, after the only day, often the only day on which they can be said to dine at all, wouldn't you? And the spirit says, no, I don't do that. And Scrooge says, will you seek to close these places on the seventh day? Now, what he's talking about are the blue
Yeah.
laws. that used to exist then. And he's thinking he's kind of seeing the Spirit as a representative of organized Christianity,
Yeah.
and the Spirit denies this. Dickens was a proponent of allowing businesses to stay open on Sundays and allowing people to enjoy themselves, because it is, as Scrooge says, it's the only day they didn't work for many people. I mean, some people didn't even have that. Some people just work 7 days. The Christmas isn't necessarily a holiday. It's actually not a holiday for most people. Unless it falls on a Sunday, you're working. So I mean, for Bob Cratchit to have off for the day is actually unusual for that time. Now, as the century goes on, it becomes more common to have off as people start to celebrate Christmas more. But earlier in 1836, while Dickens was publishing the Pickwick Papers, he also published a pamphlet.
Sunday under three heads.
Yes, and here is an image of it. We have a copy of it at the Rosenbach, um, and it's illustrated by Fizz. And it is about politicians who were trying to pass these bills that would close everything on Sunday, and they didn't succeed. And Dickens wrote this, and under the name of Timothy Sparks. It's not under Bose, and it's not under Charles Dickens. And he's doing it at the same time that he's doing, and it's advertised in the serial issues of Pickwick Papers too when it came out. And here's the three heads, as it is with this, this dour looking, preacher, as Sabbath bills would make it, a little sadder, well, the sad people here, and then as it might be made, and someone looking very happy. And here they are enjoying themselves, getting at the bakers here. They've just gotten their food made, and this kid's dancing in the street. They're having a good old time. I mean, it's a good old time if you could afford to be off and had money to buy food like this. But
that's the thing. This is such an interesting contradiction in Dickens's worldview. Like Dickens is such a staunch proponent of like. Sorry, the dogs are having drama behind me. Specifically workers' rights when it comes to children. And he's so aware of the labor situation in London, and yet he is also against this thing that will give people more time off because it allows people who have more money to have fun. And it's such an interesting contradiction in his world.
It is. This Sunday Under Three Heads was a 12,000 word attack on the legislation that would ban all leisure, all recreational activities, and all and shopping on Sunday. Even cricket would be banned under this bill. And Dickens was forcefully against it, and the bill never passed.
Right, yeah.
Dickens in it criticizes, he says the baronet's dinner must be cooked on Sunday, the bishop's horses must be groomed, the peer's carriage must be driven. So these people get to have people work for them, but why can't, other people
can't everybody
be off? So
it's a really interesting thing, and it's written satirically too, so it's like a little bit like something like Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal, where there's this aggressive pro attitude that is ultimately a con.
You can read it online. We'll put the link in the chat. Sunday Under Three Heads. It's the text is on the Gutenberg site. Well, now they had so the Spirit denies it. It's got anything to do with him. He says, there are some upon this earth of yours who lay claim to know us, and who do their deeds of passion, pride, ill will, hatred, envy, bigotry, and selfishness in our name, who are as strange to us as all our kith and kin, as if they had never lived. Remember that, and charge their doings on themselves, not us. I can't imagine that there were hypocritical, religious people then. Does that happen? We won't go down that road. Now the Spirit wants to take him and he takes him to the Cratchits, to Camden Town. This is a poor suburb of London at the time. And as I said in episode one, when we were together, Dickens' family lived there in the early 1820s at 16 Bayham Street. And then when Dickens's father was in prison for debt, 12-year-old Dickens lodged at 37 Little College Street in Camden Town. And I can't help but think that the Cratchit family and their poverty, well, for Dickens in his life, and this is the way he felt about living in Camden Town when they were very poor, it was shameful. And he was very ashamed of this period of his life and hid it from people because he was so ashamed of it. No one knew about it until he was dead, that he worked in a bottling factory, pasting labels on bottles. No one knew about it. He told his friend, Forster knew, and he told his friend because he had written a little memoir about it. And Forster published it after Dickens had died. But people at the time didn't know. But what I find fascinating here is that for the Cratchit family, he has elevated them, and their living here is anything but shameful. That,
Oh, did I cut you off?
no,
It's a really interesting departure from the way he sneaks in these little like shameful autobiographical details about this neighborhood and this period in his life. Like if you look at Oliver Twist, which came out, a bit before A Christmas Carol, there's a character in it named Fagin, who is the ringleader of the adult ringleader of the young boys, the thieves. And like Fagin has been read as, like a vaguely anti-Semitic caricature because he's like, he's coded as being like very Yiddish, very Jewish, and he's also villainous, and these qualities are sort of exaggerated to
something
various
vague about it. He's an unlikely character, and Dickens admitted it. And
I say vague because Fagin's interesting qualities as a character also relate to his Jewishness, and there's an interesting it's vaguely anti-Semitic, but he's also curious about Jewishness in a sincere way. And so it ends up being a problematic caricature, but it doesn't come from the malicious place that some of his other representations
not
did.
malicious.
No. So I say vaguely anti-Semitic more in terms of intent than result. But anyway, but Fagin is one of the villains of Oliver Twist. And Fagin is named after a friend that he had in the blacking factory where he worked as a young boy. He was friends with this young boy named Jack Fagin, who showed him the ropes and how to work in the factory, and who was by all accounts this lovely young kid who was just unfortunate. And for some reason, because of the shame of working in this factory as a child, Dickens held on to this guy's name and assigned this character, who is represented as like this very lowly figure in numerous ways. He assigned that name to him, which nobody knew until, again, after he passed away. And yet in A Christmas Carol, he does the exact opposite. He takes the Cratchit family and he puts them in this place that is associated with this period of great shame in his life. And he elevates it and he makes it this wonderful haven. It's the only time he does this.
Yeah. He's redeeming himself as well, in doing this, and redeeming his family. I mean, I'm sure he wished his father behaved as Bob Cratchit does. And this is him getting to his fantasy of, this is how I wish we had lived then.
We can also talk about Tiny Tim and his connection to Dickens's own,
We will. And I have the photo for that too.
Oh, good.
They this Cratchit family is anything but shameful. I mean, it might be a house of want, but it's also the love, the joy. The father works really hard. He doesn't waste the family money and drive up debts to creditors, as Dickens's father did. And we finally get his name now. Now here he is. He's Bob Cratchit. Hadn't been named until this point in the novel. We get a little joke about his name here. Bob had but 15 bob a week himself.
Which you feel is a joke that Scrooge also would have made.
Yeah. And some Americans might not know, a bob is a shilling. That's the slang for a shilling. It's so hard keeping track of British money but a bob is a shilling, a crown is 5 shillings, a quid is a pound, and a guinea is a pound and a shilling. So a guinea is, a quid and a bob. But nobody says that. They just say a guinea. So there you go. but a bob is a shilling, and the ghost of Christmas present blessed his four-roomed house. And then we get the description of everyone in it, from the whole family, Mrs. Cratchit and Belinda, Peter, and then the two young ones who never get named, um, and their clothes, in which he can kind of identify how poor they are, but also how they face their poverty, and that it is a Mrs. Cratchit is in a poorly is dressed out but poorly in a twice turned gown, um, uh, but it's brave in ribbons, which are cheap and make a goodly show for sixpence. Um, and Peter's got his father's shirt. Or actually his collar, his monstrous shirt collar, because the collars are separate and you attach them to the shirt, which was his father's private property conferred upon his son and heir in honor of the day. Um, and then the two smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelt the goose and known it for their own, basking in luxurious thoughts of sage and onion. It's a family that they love each other. They're excited about the simple things that they can have, and they feel no shame about their existence because they have each other. That and it's this lovely portrait. Now, when Bob finally arrived, well, Martha comes, the oldest daughter. She's been working. She was even working that morning, Christmas morning. Um, and and they're talking about Bob, and now we get the first mention of the smallest child, Tiny Tim, who Bob would carry on his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch and has his limbs supported by an iron frame. So, the very sickly child. It never gets identified in the story what he has, but
He's got it all.
he has a debilitating illness that has weakened his constitution and his limbs, and last time, with the ghost of Christmas present, young Scrooge has a sister who he loves dearly, and in the story he names her Fan. And Dickens's own sister, his older sister, actually, she was a couple years older than him, was named Fanny, and was musical like Fan is, Scrooge's sister. But also Dickens's real life sister Fanny had a child, Harry Burnett Jr., who was very ill, and died young. He died, I think he was 9 or so. He actually his mother dies first. He's not dead at this moment in the story, so it's not like inspiration of it and he died early. He's actually alive and taken care of, and Dickens contributes to all his family and helping taking care of the family. But there is a picture that still exists of him, and it is haunting picture of little Harry Burnett, and here it is. And if this doesn't make you think of Tiny Tim, I'm assuming he's lying down and they set up the camera to take his picture, and I don't know what got messed up on it. But some in the process of making it, but it winds up looking like clouds almost around him. But the expression on this boy's face is it's not a happy one. Doesn't mean he was unhappy all the time. I don't think we have those accounts, but it is, again, Dickens in his own life recognizing that children like this, he knows a child like Tiny Tim, and he is in this story. I can't even look at that picture long.
So. No, it's hard. It's heartbreaking. It's also, I mean, the sepia also makes it like extremely spooky, but it's heartbreaking.
Well, Bob and Tiny Tim come home. Hurrah. Well, Martha tricks him, but she's there. And then everybody's hurrahing. And the little Cratchits take Tiny Tim to the wash house so he can hear the pudding singing in the copper, because they're making their pudding, their plum pudding outside in the washing copper. You wrap it in the thing, and that's where it's boiled out there, where they were boiling their clothes. Not at the same time, their dirty clothes, but you would swap out the water, I hope, and put the copper and put the pudding in the copper to cook. Um, and Bob tells this story about Tiny Tim in church that really kind of, you know, it just it's his self-awareness. And it's fascinating in this story that the adults play like children, and the children do too, but Tiny Tim doesn't act like a child. He acts like a grown adult. Um, and he says sometimes somehow he gets thoughtful sitting by himself so much and thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me coming home that he hoped the people saw him in the church because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see. Um, that, that Tiny Tim has a very realistic view of his life and who he is and what he is, and the illness that he has and what it can represent to people. But Bob is very hopeful. He thinks that he's growing strong and hardy, and it's kind of, and yeah, that you see more as his hope is more of this is what he wants, that he's hoping for, but Tiny Tim probably, would have a more realistic appraisal of his condition. Well, Bob makes his punch. Drink mine. His is just gin and lemons, hot mixture on the stove, stirs it up. It's for everybody. Um, and they go and they fetch the goose. And have you ever had goose on Christmas, Olivia?
No, but I'm a vegetarian, so
Oh, so you wouldn't have
I'm
anyway.
not exactly uh representative of the typical American Epicurean holiday.
I've never had it for Christmas. And I think it's people think of it as a kind of a fancy thing now. Um, it's probably pricey, but I'm not sure because I don't get it. Um, and it's certainly going to be more expensive than, oh, I don't know, it might not be more expensive than a turkey, especially the big fat turkeys that we get.
I have no idea.
But then, especially, it was a cheap bird, and it wasn't a large bird. Geese aren't that big, but it would also be cheap, and people would raise them in the city as well. They'd have them in there'd be people who would raise them right in their back gardens around the city or in the suburbs. So, it is the goose that they have is the rarest of all birds. Or you would have thought that it was the rarest of all birds, as excited as they are. The little Cratchits crammed the spoons into their mouths lest they should shriek for goose. I love that. All these cute little details about them I really love. Um, and then it comes out, and it's, and the gush of stuffing comes forth, and um, uh, everything. It's, again, I'm hungry. This is the hungry chapter, where they keep talking about food that I want to eat right now.
Yeah.
They cut the goose, everyone celebrates, and then the pudding comes in, and it is, well, for the goose, there never was such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe there ever was such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavor, size, and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration, and everyone had had enough. The youngest Cratchits in particular were steeped in sage and onion to the eyebrows. Um, this humility of this family that in spite of it being meager, they're totally fine. And they're not putting it on. They really are. They're fine. They've had enough food. This is more than they usually get to eat, I'm sure. So this is a feast for them. Um, they don't complain about it. And then the pudding comes in, and it's a triumph. It's not just a triumph. It is the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. Now, if I said that to my wife at dinner, that this dessert is the best thing you've had. This is the greatest success of our marriage. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that would be, not go over well in the house. But it works here in that, it is, or does it work? This is a question I should add. Does it work? It seems to work in this situation that she is the person in charge of feeding the family, and it is a big responsibility for her, and she's very nervous about it too. So, but I don't know. I often see it explained away. That's why I asked the question. I see it explained away as, well, then it's a compliment. I don't know. Was it a compliment? So,
I feel like the only answer is yes, because otherwise it contradicts the vibe of the Cratchit's household so extremely.
they believe it's a compliment.
Yeah. Maybe
Well,
he says it to her every day about everything, like maybe it's
there
just
you
the
go.
inside.
That would be great. Yeah. This is the greatest.
Everything she does, he's like, this is
This
the
is
greatest
the
thing in our
most
whole marriage.
magnificent gruel I've
Yeah,
ever had. This is a
yeah,
triumph. So,
yeah.
yes, that could be it.
I choose to read the Cratchit's marriage is like 100% healthy.
Yeah. Well, it seems it in the way they relate to each other all through.
Yeah.
Um, they and are they too fantastical though? Are they too perfect? I do know people that don't like this part of it. And
Really?
yeah, and it gets me every time, and I just want to be this.
Yeah, they're having a night. They're having a nice Christmas. Let the Cratchits be.
Yes, I think so. But it is Dickens pours it on thick, and he spreads it.
That's the understatement of the century.
And I'm fine with it because I enjoy it. It's if you like something, I want a lot of it, and here I get it. So but I think for some people it does. I acknowledge that he lays it on thick for what we have here, but thank you for laying it on thick. Is my response generally.
We love
Yeah. Well, now they have the apples and oranges and chestnuts on the fire, and then the punch goes around. Everybody gets a punch. And the family display of glass, two tumblers, and a custard cup without a handle. I love that. But that's what they have, and they enjoy, and everybody gets to drink the punch. Gin for everybody, kids. They and then they toast. Well, Bob is such a good guy that he even toasts his boss, Scrooge. And I think like I wouldn't. I'd be but Bob is a good guy, and he's like he toasts him the founder of the feast. Is that what he calls him? Um uh the
Yes.
we'll have to jump
Yeah,
back
I'll
to
give you
another
Mr. Scrooge.
conversation. But this part, the founder of the feast, indeed, cried Mrs. Cratchit. She's so angry at him, but they all agree. They're like, okay, we should, and it's the only moment that is uh it was the first of their proceedings which had no heartiness. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow in the party, which was not dispelled for full 5 minutes. But there's a little conversation there with the spirit that Scrooge has that I had that happened before that, and Scrooge sees the boy, Tiny Tim, and Bob with him, and Tiny Tim's God bless us everyone, he says. And it says Bob held his withered little hand in his as if he loved the child and wished to keep him by his side and dreaded that he might be taken from him. And Scrooge asks if he'll live, and the spirit says, I see a vacant seat in the poor chimney corner and a crutch without an owner carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die. So, and then Scrooge doesn't want that. And then here's again the spirit throwing in his face the things he said. He had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Um, and chastises Scrooge with the will you decide what men shall live, what men shall die? It may be that in the sight of heaven, you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child. Um, that who is worthy and who can judge? This isn't this isn't a judgy spirit, religious spirit. He's not, you've sinned and you're, cast out. This is a spirit who, says you shouldn't judge anyone. And
He wants to teach Scrooge a lesson, and not in a punitive sense. He wants to literally teach him. And so he's like, here's what you said before that contradicts what you feel now. Here's the data.
it also kind of hints at what you were saying, that this is more a vision
Right.
than is reality.
Yes.
If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, these are shadows
Exactly.
that I'm showing you.
It's very platonic. It's like the shadows on the cave wall. He's basically watching a movie or a play. There's some sort of tableau being presented to him, but what his life could look like. I mean, it's very reminiscent of Dickens's, piece about the Sundays, Sunday under three heads, which begins, with like this very conditional phrasing, right? Like, this is the way it is, this is what it might be, this is what it might be if it's unchanged. The idea that the future is, malleable, determinate, totally determined by actions in the present. Nothing is predestined. It's very, I mean, Calvinist work ethic is sweeping the nation, but not for Dickens in this aspect. Dickens is like, you can change your fate.
Yes. It ends with this family in that they talk about how Peter might get a situation for a full 5 and 6 pence weekly. And they're like, oh my God, Peter's growing up. He's going to be a man. Martha is talks about her work. She's an apprentice at a milliner's. And she's going to get to sleep in tomorrow. Which is really nice. And they're happy. Like they don't say it like, oh, I finally get it. It's like, no, they're happy. Like, this is what I have. This is what I have to get through, and I'm willing to get through it. They're not revolutionaries. They're not, they're not like, let's change the system. They're like, this is what we got. So let's be the happiest we can be in it. Which is actually a very Christian thing. So
it is.
They were not a handsome family. They were not well dressed. Their shoes were far from being waterproof. Their clothes were scanty, and Peter might have known, and very likely did, the inside of a pawnbroker's. But they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time. They're truly happy. They're not happy in spite of. They are happy, and it's partly because they have a good family and they are, together with each other. Well, before we move on to the rest, let me take this moment to thank all of you for watching this episode. As a nonprofit organization, the Rosenbach Museum and Library depends on the generosity of friends and supporters like you to keep programs like this free and accessible to hundreds of fellow biblioventurers worldwide. I hope you will consider supporting the Rosenbach and this show by donation, which you can do at our website, or by becoming a member. Membership gives you free museum admission, discounts on programs and courses, exclusive invitations to member-only events, and early access to registration. You can learn more about how to become a member on our website. And we are continuing our special offer for new members throughout this show. If you become a member the day of a live stream of an episode, you will receive an additional month added to your membership. So that's 13 months instead of 12. Thank you to everyone who has donated or joined as members and helped us all take this Biblioventure. And I want to say a special thanks to a new member who took advantage of our special offer, and that's Gary A. from Philadelphia. Gary became a member just recently on a day of a live show. He will get 13 months of membership. And a little tease here, everyone. On December 9, which would be episode 5, our penultimate episode, I will be announcing a special subscription-only Biblioventures that will run in February and March, and you don't want to miss that announcement. It's a very exciting book. It's tied to our collections. The author's tied to our collections. It'll be a great thing, but it's going to be a subscription only show, which means you'll have to pay to watch it. And it'll be 8 episodes. This will be the same format. We'll have co-hosts and myself talking about the book, working our way through this book. There'll be cocktails that I will share with the people who register for this one. I will announce this on episode 5. And there's lots of great programs and courses at the Rosenbach. You can visit the Rosenbach as well. We are open. You can schedule a time for a guided tour, see our historic house, drop in and view our treasures exhibition. And that's it. Let's get back to our story. Rosanna writes in the chat, she misses a hat on me. Well, I'll wear a hat for not the next one. I'll wear a hat in 5. So it gets weird having a hat on while I'm trying to, because it'll, but I do like wearing hats. Where are they headed to now? The Scrooge and Spirit went along the streets. They just look at everybody now, right? Now it's like voyeur time. Are they flaneurs or are they voyeurs? They see the children running of a house running into the snow to meet their married sisters. All their family was coming. They see people of means. And the Spirit is spreading his cheer with everybody. The ghost here, how the ghost exulted, how it bared its breadth of breast and opened its capacious palm and floated on, outpouring with a generous hand its bright and harmless mirth on everything within its reach. And now these are the parts that people don't usually remember happen, because these are frequently cut from adaptations. But now they go out and visit all these other places. They go out into the bleak and desert moor, a place where miners live, and see them in their little mud and stone hut. They see a cheerful company assembled around a glowing fire, an old man and woman with their children and their children's children, and they're all singing a Christmas song. Then they go out to sea, flying over the water, and they go to a solitary lighthouse.
I love the lighthouse.
And the 2 men inside there, right, joining their horny hands over the rough table at which they sat, they wished each other a Merry Christmas and their can of grog. And then they struck up a sturdy song that was like a gale in itself. So, and then further out onto the sea, and a ship, where as they're watching everybody on the ship, every man among them hummed a Christmas tune or had a Christmas thought or spoke below his breath to his companion of some bygone Christmas day with homeward hopes belonging to it. I mean, it's like poetry, this. And there are even times when Dickens seems to like to move into blank verse. I can't remember. There's a letter that he tells somebody too that he's like, yes, I know. I've been writing in verse. But he can't help himself. And they even go like they even go overseas at some point, because, or internationally. I mean, they just go everywhere. It was a great surprise to Scrooge while listening in the moaning of the wind. What a solemn thing it was to move on through the lonely darkness over an unknown abyss whose depths were secrets as profound as death. It's yeah, it's really it's interesting language. I mean, it's almost it's interesting when Gustave Doré later in the century illustrates A Christmas Carol. He's also illustrating Dante's commedia, Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso, and and especially beginning with Virgil leading Dante around the scenes, and the illustration that Dore does of this part of the book is the spirit and Scrooge heading toward the lighthouse, but it looks just like Dante and Virgil from that story. So he kind of blends it in to this. But it is like that. It's a very spooky journey that they're taking. And the sound of that wind now turns into laughing. And it's Scrooge's nephew. And he's finally named now too. He didn't have a name before either. Dickens is just like, wait, I'm just writing this, and oh yeah, I have to name him. Okay, so now he'll name him.
No, it makes perfect sense that they're identified only with the presence of a more compassionate spirit. Like to Scrooge, they're just sort of surplus population, but here they're individuals.
Bob Cratchit is just as Clark. That's all he is. That's all he is.
Does not have an identity aside from the function he performs at work, and yet he is a person with a life.
Fred's his nephew who visits him every year, and he's like, "Get the heck out of here! You're just my nephew. I have no tie to you. We're done." But this is what he's learning. Well, now Fred's laughing. They're at Fred's house, and Scrooge right away. He's a comical old fellow. Fred is talking about Scrooge. That's the truth, and not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offenses carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him. He pities him. His wealth is of no use to him. He don't do any good with it. And this is the party. This is, Fred and his wife, who Scrooge has never met, and their friends, Topper and the niece's sisters, and they're all there having their Christmas party. And Scrooge gets to watch it, and they sing. His Scrooge's niece, meaning the girl married to his nephew, plays upon the harp. And it says, when this strain of music sounded, all the things that ghosts had shown him came upon his mind. He softened more and more and thought, if he could have listened to it often years ago, he might have cultivated the kindnesses of life for his own happiness with his own hands, without resorting to the sexton's spade that buried Jacob Marley. I like that. But he's feeling the regret that I wish I had done this. And then but the playing, and he says, after a while they played at forfeits, another game, for it is good to be children sometimes, and never better than at Christmas when its mighty founder was a child himself. Go ahead.
I have so many thoughts about this line. It's so fascinating. I mean, first of all, the scene that, is the most memorable scene in this chapter. It's not the scene that immediately comes before, but the big scene in this chapter is the Cratchit family. And we've just seen these children working on Christmas Day, or being too sick and not, being able to potentially have a future. We see childhood in its most put upon and abused, even in this loving family.
The young Cratchits have fun. They just run around and have fun. So
but they're about to go start work.
Yeah. Yep.
Like, everyone,
no time at all. They'll be working.
The childhood that they have is so truncated. It is so short and so small. And yet here, there's a childhood that's allowed to be extended on Christmas Day. Fred is a grown adult, his wife, grown adult. And they're saying, isn't it wonderful to be children today? We can all still be children for a while, but not actual children in working class, families. Because their childhoods are only for, the age that they're physically not able to contribute. And once they can, childhood's over. And the fact that he tracks all of this back to the holiday that is engineered around the worshiping of, a savior in the form of a child.
And even Tiny Tim reminds people, Jesus, when his mighty founder was a child himself.
Yes, exactly.
Tiny Tim does that as well. And adults, Dickens loves the idea of adults playing, and he did this himself at all his parties, and we'll get into that.
We're going to talk a lot about this now.
When Dickens does that at his parties, and But even Bob does when Bob Cratchit leaves Scrooge's office in that first stave, he's then out on the slide, the ice slide with everybody else, goes down it 20 times or something like that in honor of Christmas Day. Um, Adults like to play, and Dickens did too, and he really thought this was a good sign of a healthy adult
Yeah.
play still. But the children thing, and with Jesus, when Dickens rewrites the Gospels, he writes his own version of the Gospels for his children. Because he kind of he not only distrusts organized religion, he kind of distrusts the scriptures too. He's like, I can write that better. This is the message I want to give to my kids out of this, and he does. And it's interesting that one of the things he does is he doesn't he includes the shepherds that come to see Jesus, but he no wise men. There's no wealthy kings coming to visit, just the lowly sheep herders. That's how he crafts his story of Jesus's birth. He wants it to be about poor people, and but again, like we're saying, that not only kids have to grow up, but Tiny Tim is the most mature person, or is one of the mature adults in this story, and the way he faces life. And the adults get to play games. They play a game of how, when, and where. Don't worry, we'll get to 12th Night soon. They all played, and so did Scrooge. For wholly forgetting in the interest he had in what was going on, that his voice made no sound in their ears. He sometimes came out with his guess quite loud, and very often guessed quite right, too. And then he's begging to stay, like, I just want to stay. And the spirit's like, we got to go. And he's like, no. And they play a game called Yes and No. It's like a questions, and you have to guess who he's thinking of. And it turns out he's thinking of Scrooge, but it's not a flattering portrait of him. And and then Fred toasts him as well as Bob Cratchit. He has given us plenty of merriment, I am sure, said Fred, and it would be ungrateful not to drink his health. Here is a glass of mulled wine. I don't have mulled wine. I have my punch instead. Well, it is. It's wine. It's wine and brandy. So
No idea.
not mulled.
No idea what's in there. What is Madeira?
I did put a little nutmeg in it. So because Dickens always did.
He's a nutmeg guy.
And he toasts him, and they all toast him, and Scrooge had imperceptibly become so gay and light of heart that he would have pledged the unconscious company in return and thanked them in an inaudible speech if the ghost had given him time, but they're gone again. Here's where they again go visiting. So it doesn't even end there. The visits. It's like they visit many homes. Far they went in many homes, sick beds on foreign lands. They're visiting people, almshouses, hospitals, jails. This is like Jesus would do. And they in almhouse, hospital, and jail, in misery's every refuge, where vain man in his little brief authority had not made fast the door and barred the spirit out, he left his blessing and taught Scrooge his precepts. And now we're going to talk about it, because they go, Scrooge, if it were only a night, but Scrooge had his doubts of this, because the Christmas holidays appeared to be condensed into a space of time they passed together. The ghost grows older, and then they're at a children's 12th night party. So the time that they're out it's like the 12 days of Christmas. They're out visiting all these places. And it's January 6th, the Feast of the Epiphany. That's the 12th night. And it's a big day for Dickens's family. It's the birthday of his oldest son, Charlie. And they would always have parties then. And he always had a big party. And the year that he wrote this, it was like grand parties, into December and into January, especially for 12th night. But he also performed at the parties, right, Olivia? And
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yes. Oh, I would love to. Oh my God. Okay. So one of my favorite things about Charles Dickens is that for about a decade, for the period between like 1842 and 1852, Dickens was an amateur magician, and not only was he an amateur magician, he was an incredible amateur magician. He was a genius. Um, the thing that like, you know, the thing about Dickens is that he's a consummate showman. He wants to be an actor. He sort of never gets the chance to do that professionally successfully. He instead only gets to perform his stories as himself. But there's a period of 10 years where he excels at at being a magician. And it starts at the end of 1842 when he goes to his friend John Forster's house for a New Year's Eve party. And he puts on basically the dry run of a magic act that he's going to put on for his son Charlie's birthday a few days later. And like he says he turns the company's watches into tea caddies, and he causes pieces of money to fly, and he burns pocket handkerchiefs without hurting them. And he told his friend C.C. Felton that if you had seen this, you would not forget it for as long as you lived. And then Charlie's birthday party on 12th night on January 6th is even better. First of all, there's so many children there. He says the actuary of the national debt couldn't calculate the number of children who are coming. And he arranged for a magic lantern and other tremendous engines to entertain them. But the main event was his performance, his magic act. And so, at this point in the last few days, he had spent time rehearsing this act so well, and he designed this comical routine with his friend, the painter Clarkson Stanfield, who would be his assistant and who would he was sort of the Gracie Allen to his George Burns. He would sort of misunderstand everything, to the unspeakable delight of all the beholders, that he would do his part exactly the wrong way, to the unspeakable delight of all the beholders. And apparently it was amazing. It was so incredible that he got asked by his friends if he would go do magic acts at their children's birthday parties.
To hire him out. Like, hey,
exactly.
would you back to my house? My kids' parties. He could have this another career. He could have been a children's party entertainer.
Exactly. No, he really could have. And this was such a thing in his life that in 1885, 42 years after this birthday party, this 6th birthday party of Charlie's, Dickens's daughter, Mamie, who was 2 years younger than her brother, wrote that her father would very often, dressed as a magician, give a conjuring entertainment when she was very young. This was such a very important part of her childhood. And so he really developed these acts over the next few years. The following year, he is the main entertainment at the birthday party of Nina Macready, who's Charles Macready, the great stage magician, the great stage performer, William Macready, the great actor, William Macready. This is his daughter, and Macready's out. He's like performing all over the world. And Dickens is engaged as the entertainment. And both John Forster and Clarkson Stanfield are his assistants. And apparently his magic act was so incredibly good that Jane Carlyle, the wife of Thomas Carlyle, wrote about it. She said that Dickens and Forster, above all, exerted themselves till the perspiration was pouring down and they seemed drunk with their efforts. Only think of that excellent Dickens playing the conjurer for 1 whole hour, the best conjurer I ever saw, and I have paid money to see him several. And she said that she described some of his tricks. He produced a pocket handkerchief from a wine bottle. He produced a hot plum pudding from an empty saucepan.
He would pour the ingredients in, right?
Yeah, and he held it over a blazing fire, and the cauldron was Stanfield's hat. And then he produced this plum pudding without damage to the hat. And she said that trick and his other of changing ladies' pocket handkerchiefs into confit, and his a box full of bran into a live guinea pig, would, quote, enable him to make a handsome subsistence and let the bookseller trade go as it pleases. She's like, he's a way better magician than he is a writer. So uninteresting compared to his skills here. And he didn't obviously give up his career as a writer in favor of one as an illusionist, but he did start writing magician characters into his novels during this period of time. I wrote a chapter of my dissertation about his magician detectives, and like I can go long on that, but I will resist for now. But I will just say that Dickens was so, spent these 10 years enmeshed in amateur conjuring.
Mm-hmm.
And it culminated in the summer of 1849 when he made his semi-professional debut in front of an audience of family friends at Bonchurch, their summer home on the Isle of Wight. And he performed in costume, and we can assume it was, racist Orientalist costume.
It was, in a turban on his head.
Yeah, we can assume. But he appeared in the character of the unparalleled necromancer Ria Rama Ruse, who, according to the program that God bless John Forster transcribed into his biography, according to the program, had been educated Kabbalistically in the orange groves of Salamanca and the ocean caves of Alum Bay. So apparently he included this jumping card trick that Ria Rama Ruse had learned during 9 years' seclusion in the mines of Russia. A trick in which a card appears inside an unbroken loaf of bread. A trick in which the wooden doll, quote, becomes invisible, performs enormous journeys in half a minute, and passes from visibility to invisibility with an expedition so astonishing that no eye can follow its transformations. It was called the Traveling Doll Wonder. The trick, apparently, according to the program, is so incredible that the necromancer's assistant usually faints upon beholding this wonder. And then, of course, he did, some of his other ones, like the plum pudding trick and stuff. But he culminates this decade-long interest in magic in this phenomenal performance. And it's not a 12th night celebration anymore. But the 12th night celebrations, as we talked about in the first episode, were opportunities for a second Christmas time party. It was the final bookend of the holiday season. Like they did New Year's, but they didn't do New Year's as the end of the holiday season. It was the Feast of the Epiphany, and in Dickens's family's case, it was Charlie's birthday. So there was an opportunity to really go big. But the thing that Dickens is so interested by is the idea of wonders as opposed to tricks. Tricks anybody can do. Tricks a con man on the street can do. Tricks will take your money. He wants to cultivate wonders. And this is, I think, where the what the vibe of this little children's 12th night party, the sort of like enjoyment, the happy environment of Fred's Christmas party, which might have just as easily featured someone doing conjuring entertainments. Like it's about the creation of a sense of wonder and joy as opposed to
That's the whole stave. This whole stave. This is the Ghost of Christmas Present. Is this, creating wonder and joy everywhere he goes.
Exactly. And literally embodied by this enormous, giant, this happy giant in a wonderful, in a verdant robe. It's the most fascinating thing, especially considering where the story goes right afterwards.
Yes. It also makes me think, it always makes me think when it's about Dickens doing his magic shows, I always want to think of Orson Welles, another great impresario kind of artist, who also was a great magician and performed at all the Hollywood parties. They would ask him to come and perform at the parties, and he would do magic tricks, and he tells great stories about he had to wait so long, and the rabbits are like stuffed in his clothes that the whole time he has to wait. But Wells was a great magician as well, and it's these people who like to create spectacles. And Dickens, in his works, likes to. I mean, there's a spectacle aspect to his novels, and he does it. So, all right. So they're at and it's at that children's 12th night party that there's finally when Scrooge is really recognizing that the ghost has been growing older, clearly older. And our spirits' lives so short, and the ghost says it ends tonight. The time is drawing near. The chimes were ringing the 11:45 at that moment, 11:40. It's almost midnight.
Mhm.
And here's the creepy stuff now. So we've had all this joy and wonder and fun, and now it ends in this really creepy moment. He says, I see something, Scrooge says, I see something strange and not belonging to yourself, protruding from your skirts. Is it a foot or a claw? It might be a claw, for the flesh there is upon it. Look here. And he opens his robe, and it brought two children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. They knelt down at its feet and clung upon the outside of its garment. Oh man, look here, look down here, exclaimed the ghost. And it is, let me share a picture from the story. Do I have that there? No. Oh, I'll have it right in the end of this chapter. Again, this is one of the black and white illustrations, woodcuts at the end of the chapter. And I zoomed right past it. There it is. That doesn't do justice, I think, to how creepily he describes this. Now the ghost of Christmas Present, Leech now has him kind of, he's almost fading away. Now he looks like a traditional ghost.
Right.
He, um, and these are the two children who look very much like children, but I think that the text really describes them far more, monstrously. Um, a boy and girl, yellow, meager, ragged, scowling, wolfish, but prostrate too in their humility. Where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked and glared out menacing. No change, no degradation, no perversion of humanity in any grade through all the mysteries of wonderful creation has monsters half so horrible and dread. And he
Where
asks,
graceful youth should have filled their features out and touched them with its freshest tints, a stale and shriveled hand like that of age had pinched and twisted them and pulled them into shreds.
yeah, they are
Ignorance and want.
ignorance and want. They are man's, and they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. This boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware them both, and of all their degree, but most of all, beware this boy, ignorance. For on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writings be erased. Deny it, cried the spirit, stretching out his hand towards the city. Slander those who tell it ye. Admit it for your factious purposes, and make it worse, and bide the end. And then he mocks Scrooge, are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses for them? And um, this is the kind of, I mean, this is what he wrote this for. This illustration is the inspiration. I mean, the inspiration for writing this, and you talked about it on the first episode that we did. In 18, stop the share here. In 1842, 43, Dickens is preoccupied with the child labor question. And at first he thinks he's going to write a pamphlet. And then he eventually decides a story would work better. But he goes, Miss Coots, Angela Burdett Coots, the heiress for the Coots Bank, fortune, who's constantly asking Dickens for help because she wants to give away all her money over her life, philanthropically. She asks Dickens' opinion on the ragged schools. Now, ragged schools at the time, this is before compulsory education and before, it's literacy is on the rise in the century, but not all children are educated. And ragged schools are set up to educate poor children in the city. And Dickens visits one, and it's the poorest parts of London too. And the teachers are all volunteers, and any student is allowed to come. It's homeless kids there, starving, disabled, even pupils who have to go to prison for a while and then come back. And Dickens visited the Saffron Hill School, the same neighborhood where he said Fagin's house in Oliver Twist. And it's seriously, he's both shocked and amused by the children. He says, I have very seldom seen, he wrote, in all the strange and dreadful things I have seen in London and elsewhere, anything so shocking as the dire neglect of soul and body exhibited in these children. Um, he praised the teachers as honest, good men who try to teach the boys by kindness, but Dickens really thought that the religious instruction was completely ineffectual. He says to impress them, even with the idea of God, when their own condition is so desolate, becomes a monstrous task. Teaching catechism was beside the point for that's not his quote. That's me. Teaching catechism was beside the point for children because in Dickens's quote, their lives are one continued punishment. Now, and then this is all happening as he's figuring out, how do I address this issue, how do I address this issue of these child laborers and educate, if he kind of winds up moving into education, because it's not just it's not just that they're poor, it's the ignorance, and they need to be educated to rise out of this. Olivia, the message usually comes out of this Christmas Carol is that you say, what's Christmas Carol about? Or if there's a message to it, people are like, oh, it's charity,
Yeah.
it's about helping people. And I kind of think that's true, but Dickens is pretty specific about why we need to be charitable, why we need to help educate and support them. It's because if we don't, it's doomsday if
Yeah.
we educate and feed our children. And it's this is as political as this story gets, but he means it. And Dickens is completely I mean, what the spirit tells Scrooge here, Dickens believes that this is true, that this is what's happening to their society.
Yes, I mean, and it's this is the secret thesis of A Christmas Carol, right? If the Christmas Carol lifts up its skirts or lifts up the hem of its curtain, like that's the actual message. It's in these two children here, and the fact that they're children, they're not actually old people, because the point of the story is that the children are supposed to be the future, and yet if you deny the children the future, you're denying the world the future. I mean,
Yeah.
it's unbelievably political for 19th century England, in which there are reformers campaigning to be able to, for children to be able to not work and go to school. But also, like, in today's political moment, it's extraordinarily relevant. I mean, like, the, authoritarianism and the, forces that will lead to the end of the society as we know it thrive on both of these things, especially.
Yep.
You keep people ignorant, you keep them down, you prevent
Yes.
progress, you prevent any sort of societal betterment, and then you prevent the world from being able to be sustained in a positive, productive way.
That's interesting that in the next Christmas book he writes, the next year, The Chimes, he really gets kind of very political in that.
The
And then
Chimes is very political.
yeah, he's really with the labor
Yeah,
question and
yeah.
and upheaval and
We should do
rebelling
that
and
one too.
yeah.
We should do
So
like
we should.
labor and Christmas and Dickens.
I did a course on it once, the Rosaback, where we did
Nice.
the Christmas Carol and the Chimes. They but the but I think, I mean, the message isn't really about how one day you can learn and then be nice one day. That's not really what he's trying to get across to people. And here it is, the revelation in this part, that this is the this is the political side of this is the societal problem side of the way Scrooge views life.
Yeah.
This is what happens. Well, the bell struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it not. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him. That's a great end of time. And now, if you're reading it serially, it's like, I don't want to stop. Well, you can read it all. That's fine. But for those reading it serially, we're going to leave it right there where the ghost disappears and Scrooge just sees that final ghost coming in, and we'll pick it up again in the next episode. Yeah, it's a good one, huh?
I love it. Yeah, nothing creepier than a long-fingered spirit. All right. And on that happy note.
Well, this one was, and there's so much joy in this. And then it ends like he just like hammers you right at the end. Oh, guess what? You know, all that joy and happiness and wonder he's having.
It can all be over if we
Oh,
don't educate the children.
yeah. So ignorance and wants come creeping out of his robe. Um, well, thank you, Olivia, for joining me for this. On the next episode, everyone, Max McGee, who I think has been very busy in the chat for this episode, will return for Stave 4. That's the scary one. And then both Max and Olivia will be back on episode 5. And then we'll finish on episode 6 with James Armstrong. But the next episode, we're halfway done. But so 3 more to go. Thanks to our chat Cratchit, Brianna, for managing the live chat links. And also, we couldn't do these shows without the generous support of our patrons. You can support the Rosenbach through donation. Your support helps us create more programs like this and also care for our collections. You can also become a member. Membership gives you early access and discounts to programs and courses. You can find out more at our website, rosenbach.org. And remember, we also have a special deal. If you join as a member on the day of that a show streams live, you get an extra month added to your membership. So you get 13 months instead of 12. Again, let me remind you to subscribe to our channel, to like these videos. Thanks, Olivia. Bye-bye. I am Edward G. Pettit, everyone of the Rosenbach Museum and Library, where the door to your biblioventure is always open.